The old lawyer pushed a hand-drawn map across his desk. The paper was yellowed at the edges, soft as cloth from age, and the ink had faded to the color of dried blood. Three words were written in a trembling hand at the bottom corner. Sealed for Wren. I stared at those words, and something cold moved through my chest. Something that felt like the first crack in a wall I had spent my entire childhood building. Your grandmother left specific instructions, Clarence Odom said. His voice was careful, measured, the way people speak when they are delivering news they do not fully understand. This was to be given to you, and only you, when you turn 17. I have no idea what it means or where it leads. She never explained. I was 17 years and 3 days old. For most of my life, I had been a number in a file, a name on a rotation list, a body that occupied beds in 6 different foster homes and 2 group facilities. Before that, I had been someone else entirely. A girl named Wren, who lived with her grandmother in a house that smelled of lavender and old books. Then my parents died. Then my grandmother supposedly lost her mind. Then the system swallowed me whole. Now I was sitting in a lawyer's office in a small Montana town I had never seen before, holding a map that made no sense, inheriting a life I had been told no longer existed. The lawyer's office smelled of pipe tobacco and furniture polish. A grandfather clock ticked in the corner, counting seconds that felt like hours. Through the window behind him, I could see Main Street stretching toward mountains that rose like sleeping giants against a gray October sky. The estate consists of 80 acres, Mr. Odom continued, sliding a folder across his desk. A farmhouse, a barn, various outbuildings. Your grandmother lived there alone for the past decade, until her passing 3 weeks ago. Alone. The word landed like a stone in still water. There are complications, he said, and his voice shifted, became heavier. A man named Leland Croy has been living on the property for the past 6 months. He claims to be a distant cousin. He has documentation suggesting your grandmother signed the property over to him before her death. I looked up from the map. Documentation? A deed transfer, notarized, dated 8 months ago. Mr. Odom removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly, a gesture that seemed designed to buy time. I have concerns about its validity. Your grandmother was quite ill by then. Her mental state was questioned by many. Questioned. That was the word they had always used. Her mental state was questioned. She is no longer capable. The child will be better served by the state. I had heard those words when I was 5 years old, standing in a hallway that smelled of floor wax and fear, watching strangers decide my future while my grandmother wept in another room. There are other items she left specifically for you, Mr. Odom said. He reached into a drawer and withdrew 3 objects, placing them on the desk between us like offerings at an altar. The first was a thick envelope. He opened it and counted out 20 bills. $2,000. She was very specific that this was for your immediate needs. $2,000. More money than I had ever held in my hands. In the group home, we received a small allowance each week, enough for toiletries and bus fare. This felt like a fortune. It felt like freedom. The second item was a key, old iron, heavy in my palm, with an ornate head and a complex tooth bit. It looked like something that would unlock a castle door or a prison gate. For the house, he said, though his voice carried a note of uncertainty. Presumably. And then there was the map. The map I was still holding, the paper soft between my fingers, the 3 words burning into my vision like a brand. Sealed for Wren. I don't understand, I said. She left me a map? To what? That I cannot tell you. Mr. Odom leaned back in his chair, and I saw something in his eyes that might have been frustration or might have been concern. Miriam Calloway was a complicated woman, brilliant in her way. She was a geography teacher for 40 years, you know. Loved maps, loved the land. After your parents passed, she became reclusive. Some said eccentric, others said worse. Worse. I knew what that meant. I had heard the whispers my whole life. Your grandmother went crazy after your parents died. She couldn't cope. She couldn't take care of you. She gave you up because she was broken. I had believed it. For over a decade, I had believed every word. I had built my entire identity around the foundational truth that I had been abandoned, that I was unwanted, that the woman who should have loved me most had simply let me go. But the map in my hands told a different story, or the beginning of one. What about this man, I asked. Leland Croy. What happens to him? That will need to be determined by the courts. Mr. Odom's jaw tightened. He has legal representation. The property is contested. It could take months to sort out. He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. In the meantime, he remains in possession of the house. I would advise you to approach the situation with caution. Caution. Another word that meant something else entirely. Be careful, be quiet, be small. Don't make trouble. I had spent years being cautious, years following rules, keeping my head down, surviving. And where had it gotten me? A plastic bag of belongings. $47 in my pocket when I aged out of the system 3 days ago. A bus ticket to a town I had never seen, to claim an inheritance that might not even be mine. I folded the map carefully and tucked it into the inside pocket of my jacket, next to my heart. I put the key in my front pocket, where I could feel its weight against my thigh, and I slid the envelope of cash into my bag, between my only change of clothes and the single photograph I owned. The photograph showed a woman with silver hair and kind eyes, holding a small girl on her lap. Both were laughing. Behind them, a farmhouse with a wide porch caught the summer sun. I had stolen that photograph from my file when I was 13. It was the only image I had of my grandmother, the only proof that once, long ago, someone had held me like I mattered. Thank you, I said to Mr. Odom standing. For everything. He stood as well, extending his hand. His grip was firm, his palm dry. Be careful, Miss Calloway. Willow Creek is a small town, but the mountains are big, and Leland Croy is not a man to be trusted. I nodded, already moving toward the door. One more thing, he called after me. I stopped, my hand on the brass doorknob. Your grandmother spoke of you often in those final months. She said you would come. She said you would find it. His voice dropped. I asked her what it was. She just smiled and said, the truth. Whatever that means. I walked out of that office and into the cold mountain air, and I felt something shift inside me. A door opening, a question forming. What truth? The bus from the county seat had dropped me in front of a general store on Main Street, and that was where I returned now, my bag over my shoulder, the key in my pocket, the map pressed against my heart. The store was called Sutter's Mercantile, and a hand-painted sign in the window read, Established 1923. If we don't have it, you don't need it. A bell chimed when I pushed open the door. The smell hit me first. Coffee, wood smoke, cinnamon, old wood. It was the smell of another time, a simpler time. And for a moment I was 5 years old again, walking into a general store with my grandmother's hand warm around mine. The woman behind the counter looked up from her crossword puzzle. She was in her early 70s with a cloud of white hair pinned up loosely and eyes the color of faded denim. She wore a flannel shirt over a turtleneck, and reading glasses hung from a chain around her neck. She took one look at me and her hand went to her chest. Lord have mercy, she breathed. Your Grace's girl. I stopped in the middle of the store, between a shelf of canned goods and a rack of work gloves. No one had mentioned my mother's name in years. Hearing it spoken aloud in this stranger's voice was like being struck. You knew my mother? Knew her? The woman came around the counter, moving faster than her age suggested. I watched that girl grow up. I watched her fall in love with your father. I watched her carry you into this very store when you were 3 days old, so proud she could barely speak. She stopped in front of me, her eyes moving over my face like she was reading a language she had almost forgotten. You look just like her. Same eyes, same stubborn chin. I didn't know what to say. I had so few memories of my mother, a laugh, a smell, the feeling of being held. I'm Opal, the woman said. Opal Sutter. I've owned this store for 42 years. Your grandmother was my closest friend. Was. The past tense cut through the moment like a blade. I'm sorry for your loss, I said, because that was what you were supposed to say. Opal made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. I'm sorry for yours, child. I'm sorry for all of it. All these years, and Miriam never stopped talking about you. Never stopped hoping. Hoping. The word didn't match the story I knew. The story where my grandmother gave up, where she couldn't cope, where she let me go. Can you tell me how to get to the farm? I asked. To Cedar Ridge Road? Opal's face changed. The warmth dimmed, replaced by something more complicated. Wariness, maybe, or fear. You're going out there? Now? It's my inheritance. Supposedly, the Croy man is out there. She said his name like it tasted bad. He showed up 6 months ago, out of nowhere. Said he was family. Miriam was too sick to fight him by then. Too weak. He just moved in. Started acting like he owned the place. Mr. Odom told me. He said there's a deed transfer. Opal's eyes narrowed. That deed is a lie. Miriam would never have signed that property away. That land has been in your family for 4 generations. She would have died before giving it to a stranger. She paused, her jaw working. And she did die 3 weeks ago, alone in that house, with that man sleeping down the hall. Something cold moved through my chest. Not grief exactly, something sharper. Something that felt like the beginning of rage. I need to see it, I said. I need to see the house, the land. I need to understand. Opal studied me for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. Cedar Ridge Road is 2 miles out of town. Take Main Street north until it turns to gravel. Then follow the fork to the left. The farm is at the end, where the road meets the mountain. She reached under the counter and pulled out a small can of lubricating oil. Take this. The locks haven't been used properly in years. And take this too. She handed me a business card. On it was a phone number and an address in town. That's my home. If anything feels wrong out there, if you need anything at all, you come back here. You understand? I nodded, though I didn't fully understand. Not yet. Your grandmother loved you, Opal said quietly, more than anything in this world. Whatever story you've been told about why she let you go, it's not the whole truth. It's not even close. I walked out of that store with the oil in my bag and the business card in my pocket, and I started up Main Street toward the mountains. The October air was sharp and clean, carrying the smell of pine and the distant promise of snow. The sky had gone heavy with clouds, and a light mist began to fall, soft as whispered secrets. 2 miles. I had walked farther than that in my life. I had walked miles in the middle of the night, running from one foster home to another. I had walked until my feet bled, trying to find a place that felt like home. This walk felt different. Each step carried me closer to something I couldn't name, something that felt like both ending and beginning. The road turned to gravel, then to dirt, then to 2 muddy ruts carved into the mountainside. The trees closed in, pine and cedar and aspen with leaves the color of gold coins. A creek ran alongside the road, its water dark and fast, singing over stones. And then the trees opened, and I saw it. The farmhouse stood at the end of the road, where the land flattened into a meadow before rising again toward the mountain behind it. It was 2 stories of weathered white clapboard, with a wide wraparound porch and green shutters that had faded to the color of sage. A barn stood 50 yards behind it, its red paint long since gone to gray. Beyond that, fields stretched toward the foothills, brown with autumn, waiting for winter. It was beautiful, and it was not abandoned, not neglected, not the ruin I had imagined. Smoke rose from the chimney. A pickup truck sat in the driveway, mud splattered and new. Someone was living here, someone who was not me. I stood at the edge of the property for a long time, the mist dampening my hair, the key heavy in my pocket. The house watched me with dark windows, giving nothing away. Then the front door opened and a man stepped onto the porch. He was in his 50s with the kind of weathered handsomeness that came from time spent outdoors. His hair was silver at the temples, his jaw square, his smile wide and white and completely without warmth. He wore a canvas jacket over a flannel shirt, the uniform of a man who wanted to look like he belonged here. But his eyes were wrong. Even from 50 feet away, I could see it. His eyes were calculating, measuring, cold. "You must be Wren," he called out, his voice carrying across the meadow. "The long-lost granddaughter. I was wondering when you'd show up." I walked toward the house, my boots sinking slightly in the soft earth. Every instinct I had developed in years of survival was screaming at me to turn around, to run, to get away from this man and his wrong eyes and his false smile. But I had run my whole life. I had let other people tell me where to go, what to do, who I was. Not anymore. "I'm Wren Calloway," I said, stopping at the bottom of the porch steps. "This is my grandmother's house. My house now." Leland Croy's smile widened, but his eyes stayed cold. "Well, now that's where it gets complicated, isn't it? Your grandmother signed this property over to me before she passed. Legal and proper. Notarized and everything. The lawyer told me. He also told me the document is being contested. Lawyers!" He waved a hand dismissively. "They'll take your money and tell you whatever you want to hear. The fact is, I have a deed with Miriam's signature on it. I've been living here for 6 months, taking care of the place, paying the bills, and I intend to stay." He was lying. I could feel it in my bones. The way I had learned to feel lies from foster parents who promised forever and delivered nothing. He was lying about the signature, about his intentions, about everything. But I had no proof. Not yet. "I'd like to see my grandmother's things," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Her personal belongings, whatever wasn't included in the estate." For just a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Annoyance. Or maybe fear. "Most of her things were cleared out," he said smoothly. "She didn't have much. A few clothes, some old books. I donated them to charity. Seemed like the right thing to do." He had destroyed evidence. That was what he was telling me. He had gotten rid of whatever might have proven his claim was false. But he had missed something. He had to have missed something. My grandmother had spent 40 years teaching geography, teaching maps, teaching people to read the land. She was not the kind of woman who left things to chance. "I'd still like to look around," I said, "if you don't mind." "Actually, I do mind." His voice hardened, the false friendliness dropping away like a mask. "This is my property now, and you're trespassing. You're welcome to stay tonight, out of the goodness of my heart. But tomorrow you'll need to leave." I looked at the house behind him, at the windows that reflected the gray sky, at the porch where my grandmother must have stood 1,000 times, looking out at the mountains she loved. "Fine," I said. "One night." I climbed the porch steps and walked past him, close enough to smell his cologne, something expensive and out of place. He stepped aside and I pushed open the front door and walked into my grandmother's house for the first time in over a decade. The inside had been changed. The walls had been painted, the furniture rearranged, the pictures removed. It smelled of cleaning products and something else, something chemical that didn't belong. But underneath it all, I could still catch traces of lavender, of old books, of the woman who had lived here, who had waited here, who had died here with so much left unsaid. The living room opened onto a kitchen, and the kitchen opened onto a hallway that led to bedrooms. I walked through the house slowly, Leland following at a distance, watching me with those cold, calculating eyes. The first bedroom had been converted into an office. A desk, a computer, filing cabinets. His space now. The second bedroom was a guest room, generic and empty. The third bedroom was at the end of the hall, and when I pushed open the door, my heart stopped. It was small, no bigger than a closet. A single bed with a faded quilt, a wooden dresser with a cracked mirror, lace curtains that filtered the gray afternoon light, and on the wall, half hidden behind a wardrobe that had been pushed into the corner, was a child's drawing in a simple wooden frame. I crossed the room in 3 steps and moved the wardrobe aside, my hands shaking. The drawing was mine. I had made it when I was 5 years old, sitting at my grandmother's kitchen table with crayons and paper and all the innocent certainty of a child who believes the world is good. 2 stick figures holding hands. A yellow sun with a smiling face. A house with a red door. I had written my name at the bottom in wobbly letters. Wren. That was already here when I moved in, Leland said from the doorway. His voice was careful now, watching me for a reaction. I didn't realize what it was. He was lying again. He had moved the wardrobe to hide it. He had seen it and known what it meant and tried to make it disappear. But he had failed, because here it was, proof that once upon a time, a little girl had lived in this house, had been loved in this house, had made art that her grandmother kept on her wall for all those years. My grandmother had not given up on me. She had not forgotten. She had kept this drawing, this piece of me, and she had died with it still hanging on her wall. Everything I believed was wrong. I took the drawing down from the wall, frame and all, and held it against my chest. "Get out," I said quietly. "Excuse me?" "Get out of this room. This was my room. This is my drawing. Get out." For a long moment, Leland didn't move. I could feel his anger radiating off him, the controlled fury of a man who was not used to being challenged. Then he smiled, that cold, empty smile. "You have one night," he said. "Tomorrow you're gone." He walked away and I closed the door behind him, and I stood in the middle of my grandmother's house, holding a piece of my own childhood in my hands. And I understood for the first time that I was not here to inherit a piece of land. I was here to uncover a truth that someone had tried very hard to bury. I waited until midnight. The house had gone quiet hours ago. Leland's footsteps had faded up the stairs, and after a while I heard the creak of bed springs, the shifting weight of a man settling into sleep. I had not slept. I had sat on the edge of the narrow bed in the small room, holding my childhood drawing, listening to the wind move through the trees outside the window. Waiting. At midnight I moved. The floorboards creaked beneath my feet, no matter how carefully I stepped. Every sound felt enormous in the darkness, every breath too loud. But I had learned to be quiet in the foster homes, learned to move through the night without being heard. It was a skill I had hoped never to use again. I found the back door in the kitchen and slipped outside into the cold October night. The mist had thickened into a light rain, and the world was draped in gray. The barn loomed ahead of me, a darker shadow against the darkness, and beyond it, I could make out the shape of a smaller building, a shed or a workshop. That was where I needed to go. The workshop was exactly where I remembered it from the photograph in Mr. Odom's file. A small wooden structure, maybe 20 feet square, with a single window and a door that faced away from the main house. The door was padlocked, but the lock was old and rusted. I pulled out the can of oil Opal had given me and applied it to the mechanism, working carefully, patiently, the way I had learned to work on 100 small problems in 100 temporary homes. After 10 minutes, the lock clicked open. Inside, the smell hit me first. Wood and oil and dust and time. But underneath that, something else. Something that smelled like paper, like ink, like the inside of a library. I pulled out the small flashlight I had bought at Opal's store and switched it on. The beam revealed a room that was nothing like the rest of the house. Here, nothing had been touched. Dust covered every surface like a soft gray blanket, and cobwebs hung in the corners like lace curtains. A drafting table stood against the far wall, covered in maps. A surveyor's transit sat on a tripod in the corner. Shelves lined the walls, filled with boxes and binders and stacks of paper. My grandmother had been a geography teacher, but this was more than a hobby. This was an obsession. I moved through the room slowly, my flashlight beam dancing across the surfaces. The maps were of this region, the mountains around Willow Creek, but they were covered in notes, calculations, symbols I didn't understand. She had been tracking something, measuring something. And then I found the trap door. It was in the floor beneath a worn rug that I almost tripped over. A simple wooden hatch with a metal ring for a handle. I pulled it open. Below was a small space, no bigger than a closet, carved into the earth beneath the workshop floor. And inside that space was a single leather-bound book. I reached down and lifted it out. The leather was soft with age, the pages thick and cream-colored. A strap held it closed. My hands were shaking as I untied the strap and opened to the first page. The handwriting was my grandmother's. I would have recognized it anywhere, even after all these years. The same careful letters, the same slight slant to the right. The first entry was dated over a decade ago, 3 weeks after my parents' funeral. They think I have lost my mind. They think grief has broken me. Let them think it. It is safer for Ren this way. Now the real work begins. If you have been listening this far, I want to ask you something. Have you ever discovered that someone you thought abandoned you was actually protecting you? That the story you believed about your own life was not the real story at all? I am asking because I want you to understand what it felt like to sit in that cold workshop at midnight, holding my grandmother's journal, realizing that everything I had believed for most of my life was a lie. Not a lie she told me, a lie she told the world, a lie she told so convincingly that even the people who loved her believed it, a lie that cost her everything, including me. If you know what that feels like, I would love to hear your story in the comments below. And if you want to know what my grandmother was really hiding and what it has to do with the map that led me here, then keep listening. Because the truth I found in that journal changed everything. I read through the night. The rain grew heavier, drumming against the workshop roof, and my flashlight battery ran low and had to be replaced. But I did not stop reading. I could not stop. Each page of that journal pulled me deeper into a story I had never known existed. My parents did not die in an accident. That was the truth at the center of everything. The truth my grandmother had spent years proving. Thomas and Grace Calloway had been driving home from a dinner party on a spring evening, a lifetime ago. The road they took wound along the edge of a mountain, following a route that my grandmother had surveyed herself decades earlier. It was stable ground, safe ground. She had verified it herself. But that night the road collapsed. A landslide swept their car off the mountain and into the ravine below. The official report called it a natural disaster, an act of God. The heavy spring rains had destabilized the soil, the report said. These things happened in mountain country. My grandmother did not believe it. She had walked that road 100 times. She knew every inch of it, every rock and root and drainage pattern. The culverts were clear, she wrote in her journal. I checked them myself the week before. That road should not have failed. Something is wrong. She started investigating, quietly at first asking questions of the county engineer, the geological survey, the state highway department. Everyone told her the same thing. It was a tragedy, but it was natural. Nothing could have been done, but my grandmother kept looking. She went back to the site of the collapse month after month, taking soil samples, measuring drainage patterns, documenting everything with the precision of the trained geographer she was. And she found something that should not have been there: chemicals, industrial waste, buried in the ground upstream from the road, leaching into the soil, destabilizing the earth. Someone had dumped toxic waste on public land, and that waste had caused the landslide that killed my parents. The journal entries became more urgent as I read on. She traced the contamination back to its source, a mining company called Ridgeline Mining, which had operated in the area 30 years earlier. When the company went bankrupt, they had quietly disposed of their waste by burying it in the mountains. Cheaper than proper disposal, invisible, forgotten, until it wasn't. My grandmother gathered evidence for months: soil samples, water tests, geological surveys. She even found a former Ridgeline employee who was willing to talk, a man who had helped bury the waste and had lived with the guilt ever since. But when she tried to bring her evidence to the authorities, she hit a wall. Ridgeline Mining no longer existed, but the land had been purchased by a new company, a development firm with money and lawyers and connections in the state government. They were planning to build a ski resort, a luxury destination that would bring millions of dollars to the region. My grandmother's evidence threatened all of that. She wrote about being followed, a truck with tinted windows parked at the end of her driveway, clicking sounds on her phone line, a break-in at her home, though nothing was taken. "They know I know," she wrote. "They are watching me." And then the entry that broke my heart: "I cannot protect Ren and fight this at the same time. They know she is all I have. If they see me as a threat, they will use her against me. I must make them believe I am no threat. I must make everyone believe I have given up, even if it means losing her." She had faked her breakdown, the grief, the confusion, the inability to care for a child. All of it was a performance, designed to convince the authorities to take me away, to convince the company that she was no longer a threat. She had given me up to save me. For over a decade, she had lived alone in this house, maintaining the fiction of a broken old woman while secretly gathering more evidence, building a case that would be undeniable. And she had waited. Waited for me to turn 17. Waited for me to be old enough to understand. Waited to give me the choice she had never had. I closed the journal as dawn began to lighten the workshop windows. My face was wet with tears I didn't remember crying. My body was stiff from sitting on the cold floor for hours. Everything I had believed about my life was wrong. I was not abandoned. I was hidden. I was not unwanted. I was protected. My grandmother had not broken down. She had gone to war. And now somehow, that war had become mine. The map was still in my jacket pocket, pressed against my heart. I pulled it out now and studied it in the gray morning light. It showed a section of mountain behind the farmhouse, the contour lines precise and measured, the landmarks labeled in my grandmother's careful handwriting: the split pine, Eagle Rock, Whispering Falls, and at the center marked with a bold X, sealed for Ren. Whatever she had been protecting, whatever evidence she had spent years gathering, it was up there, hidden in the mountains, waiting for me. I tucked the journal into my jacket alongside the map and slipped out of the workshop as the first rays of sun broke through the clouds. The house was still quiet. Leland Croy was still asleep, unaware that his carefully constructed lies were about to unravel. I walked past the barn and into the fields behind it, following the tree line toward the mountain. The grass was wet with rain and heavy with dew, soaking my boots, but I barely noticed. My mind was on the journal, on the truth, on the choice that lay ahead, because I understood now why my grandmother had left me two separate inheritances. The map led to answers, but it also led to danger. If I followed it, if I found what she had hidden, I would have the power to expose the people who had killed my parents. I would have justice, but I would also have enemies, Powerful enemies who had already killed to protect their secrets and would not hesitate to do so again. She had given me a choice, the same choice she had made all those years ago. Fight or survive. I could walk away right now, take the $2,000, disappear, start over somewhere new. No one would blame me. My grandmother would not blame me. But as I climbed higher into the mountain, as the farmhouse disappeared behind me and the trees closed in around me, I knew that walking away was no longer possible. My parents were dead. My grandmother was dead. And the people responsible had never faced consequences. I could not let that stand. The trail was faint, barely more than a deer path winding through the underbrush. But the landmarks were exactly where the map said they would be. The split pine came first, a massive tree that had been struck by lightning decades ago, one half blasted away, the other half still stubbornly alive, its needles green against the gray sky. I remembered playing near a tree like this when I was very small, hiding in the hollow of its trunk while my grandmother pretended to search for me, her laughter echoing through the forest. The memory was so vivid, so unexpected, that I had to stop and catch my breath. This was real. This was all real. I had been here before, had walked these paths before, had been loved by a woman who gave up everything to protect me. I kept climbing. Eagle Rock came next, a massive granite boulder jutting out from the mountainside, shaped roughly like a bird's head. From its base, I could see the valley below, the farmhouse a tiny speck of white against the brown fields, the town of Willow Creek a collection of shapes in the distance. My grandmother had stood here too, I realized, had looked at the same view, had mapped the same land. Every step I took, she had taken before me. The falls were the last landmark, a small cascade of water tumbling over mossy ledges, barely 10 feet high but musical, constant, a sound that seemed to speak words just below the threshold of understanding. According to the map, the sealed location was just ahead, a few hundred yards past the falls, against a sheer rock face that rose like a wall above the forest. I pushed through the final stand of trees and found myself at the base of the cliff. It was massive, 50 feet of solid gray stone, slick with rain and green with moss. It looked completely natural, completely impassable. But my grandmother had not left me a map to nowhere. I studied the rock face carefully, looking for what did not belong. And then I saw it. A line. A faint vertical seam running from the ground to about 7 feet up, so thin it was almost invisible. It looked like a natural crack in the stone, but it was too straight, too precise. My grandmother had cut a door into the living rock and then fitted it back so perfectly that no one would ever notice unless they knew exactly where to look. I had brought tools from the workshop, a crowbar, a sledgehammer, a flashlight with fresh batteries. I wedged the tip of the crowbar into the seam and began to work. The stone resisted. Whatever mortar or sealant she had used, it was strong. But I was stronger. I was fueled by years of anger and confusion and grief, and I was not going to stop until I found what she had hidden. I hammered the crowbar deeper into the crack. I leaned my full weight into it. I felt the stone begin to shift. An hour later, sweat soaking my clothes despite the cold, I finally pried the door open. It swung inward on hidden hinges, revealing a rectangle of absolute darkness. Cold, dry air rushed out, carrying a smell of stone and paper, and something chemical, like a preservation lab. I clicked on my flashlight and stepped into the mountain. The cave was not a cave at all. It was a room. My grandmother had excavated a space roughly 20 feet square, reinforced the walls with some kind of sealant to keep out moisture, and filled it with shelves. Metal shelving units, the kind you might find in a library or an archive, bolted into the stone walls. And on those shelves were boxes, dozens of them, archival storage boxes neatly labeled in my grandmother's handwriting. Soil samples, Sector 4, water analysis, ridgeline property, internal memos, 1993 to 1998, geological survey, collapse site. She had built a fortress of evidence, a hidden archive, completely sealed from the outside world, waiting for someone to find it. Waiting for me. I walked deeper into the cave, my flashlight beam dancing across the labels. My heart was pounding. My hands were shaking. And then I saw the table. It was in the center of the room, a simple folding table covered with a cloth. On it sat two metal footlockers and a single envelope with my name on it. Wren. I picked up the envelope. The paper was heavy and cream-colored, the same paper my grandmother had used for her journal. I tore it open and pulled out a single sheet covered in her careful handwriting. My dearest Wren, if you are reading this, then you found your way here. You followed the map, solved the puzzle, opened the door. I am so proud of you. I am also so deeply sorry. I know you must have hated me. I know you must have believed, as everyone else believed, that I abandoned you, that I was broken, that I gave up. The truth is exactly the opposite. I gave you up to save you. Your parents did not die in an accident. They were killed by the negligence of powerful people who valued profit over human life. These people knew that their buried poison was leaching into the soil, knew that it was destabilizing the land, and they did nothing. Because digging it up would have cost millions of dollars and exposed them to liability. So they let the poison spread, and when the road collapsed, when your parents died, they covered it up. I spent years proving this. Everything in this room is evidence. Soil samples, water tests, internal company memos, sworn testimony from witnesses. It is enough to destroy them, but it is also enough to get you killed. These people are dangerous, Wren. They have silenced witnesses before. They have made problems disappear. If you take this evidence to light, they will come for you. That is why I have left you a choice. The small footlocker contains $100,000. It is every penny I had in the world, saved over a lifetime for you. Take it, leave this place, and never look back. Build a life somewhere far from here, where no one knows your name. Be happy, be safe. The large footlocker contains the original evidence, the smoking guns, the proof that will bring them down. If you take it, you are choosing to fight. You will not be safe. You will be a target. But you will have the chance to give your parents' deaths meaning. The choice is yours, Wren. Freedom or justice. You cannot have both. Whatever you decide, know that I loved you more than my own life. Every day of these years apart, I thought of you. I prayed for you. I worked toward the moment when you would be old enough, strong enough to come home. I hope that moment has finally arrived. I hope you choose to fight. But if you choose to run, I will not blame you. Neither would your parents. You were always loved. Never forget that. Forever yours, Grandma Miriam. I lowered the letter. My hands were trembling so badly that the paper shook. For a long moment I could not move, could not think, could barely breathe. $100,000. A new life, safety, peace, or a fight that could get me killed. My grandmother had given me the same choice she had faced all those years ago, and she had made her choice clear. She had fought alone, in secret, for over a decade. She had sacrificed her reputation, her home, her relationship with me. She had died in a house occupied by a stranger, surrounded by enemies, still waiting for justice. I looked at the two footlockers. The small one was freedom, a ticket out. The clean slate I had dreamed about in every foster home, every group facility, every night I had lain awake wondering if anyone would ever want me. The large one was truth, and war, and possibly death. I thought about my parents, about their faces in the photographs I had stolen from files and hidden in my belongings. about the feeling of my mother's arms around me, a ghost of a memory from a lifetime ago. I thought about my grandmother, about the woman who had loved me enough to let me hate her, who had spent years alone, fighting a battle no one knew about, protecting a secret that could have gotten her killed. I thought about Leland Croy, sleeping in my grandmother's house, confident that his lies would never be exposed. About the faceless executives at Ridgeline Mining, living their comfortable lives, never paying for the deaths they had caused. And I made my choice. I opened the large footlocker. Inside were files, thick manila folders stuffed with documents, photographs, sworn statements. I rifled through them quickly, seeing glimpses of the truth my grandmother had spent years assembling. Internal memos from Ridgeline Mining executives acknowledging the contamination and deciding to let the problem resolve itself naturally. Geological reports that had been altered before being submitted to regulators. A sworn affidavit from a former employee detailing exactly where and when the waste had been buried. It was enough. It was more than enough. I closed the footlocker and lifted it. It was heavy, maybe 50 pounds, awkward to carry, but I could manage. I did not open the small footlocker. I did not count the money. I did not even look at it. Let it stay here, I thought, a monument to a choice I did not make. I carried the evidence out of the cave and into the daylight. The rain had stopped, and the sun was breaking through the clouds, casting long golden rays across the mountainside. I sealed the door behind me as best I could. Then I began the long walk down the mountain. I want to pause here for a moment. If you are still listening, I want to ask you, what would you have done? $100,000 in a new life? Or a fight against people who have already killed and will not hesitate to kill again? I chose to fight, but I understand if you would have chosen differently. There is no shame in wanting to survive, no shame in choosing peace over war. But for me, there was no real choice at all. My parents were dead, my grandmother was dead, and the people responsible had never faced justice. I could not walk away from that. Not anymore. If this story is resonating with you, if you understand why I made the choice I made, I would love to hear from you. Subscribe to this channel if you want to know what happened next, because the fight was just beginning and it nearly cost me everything. The walk down the mountain took longer than the climb up. The footlocker was heavy and awkward, and I had to stop frequently to rest, shifting the weight from one arm to the other. But I kept moving, one step at a time, closer to the valley, closer to the truth I was carrying. I reached the farmhouse just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The pickup truck was still in the driveway, but something was different. The front door stood open. Light spilled across the porch. Leland Croy was waiting for me. He stood in the doorway, his silhouette black against the light behind him. In his hand was a flashlight. In his other hand was something that glinted like metal. "You went up the mountain," he said. His voice was different now. The false friendliness was gone, stripped away like dead skin. What remained was cold and hard and dangerous. "You found the old woman's little hiding place." I stopped at the edge of the yard, the footlocker heavy in my arms. My heart was pounding, but I kept my voice steady. "I found the truth." He stepped off the porch and walked toward me, his boots crunching on the gravel. "The truth." He almost laughed. "You think truth matters? You think anyone will believe the ravings of a crazy old woman and her foster kid granddaughter? I think the soil samples will speak for themselves." He stopped. Just for a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Fear. "Give me the box," he said quietly. "Give it to me, and you can walk away. I'll even let you keep the house. No one needs to get hurt." People already got hurt. My parents got hurt. My grandmother got hurt. And you helped to cover it up. His jaw tightened. The metal object in his hand caught the fading light, and I saw it was a wrench, a heavy iron wrench. "You're making a mistake, little girl." A very big mistake. The only mistake was thinking you could bury the truth forever. I turned and ran. He came after me, crashing through the underbrush, cursing. But I knew these woods. I had played in them as a child, had walked them with my grandmother. I knew every root, every hollow, every hidden path. And I was faster than a 52-year-old man who had spent too many years behind a desk. I ran until my lungs burned, until the sounds of pursuit faded behind me, until I emerged onto the road that led to town. And I kept running, the footlocker clutched against my chest, until I saw the lights of Opal's house glowing in the darkness. I pounded on the door, gasping for breath. After a long moment, a light came on inside. Opal Sutter opened the door in a bathrobe, her white hair loose around her shoulders, her face creased with sleep and then with concern. "Good Lord, child, what happened?" "I found it," I said. "I found what my grandmother was hiding, and I need your help." She looked at the footlocker in my hands, at my face, at the desperation in my eyes. Then she stepped aside and let me in. By morning, the news had begun to spread. Opal made phone calls to Clarence Odom, the lawyer, to Herschel Bryn, the farmer who lived next to my grandmother's property, to the pastor of the Methodist church and the owner of the hardware store, and the volunteer fire chief and a dozen other people whose names I did not know, but whose faces I would come to recognize in the days and weeks ahead. They came to Opal's house that morning, one by one, and they listened as I told them what I had found. About my parents' death, about the buried poison, about my grandmother's investigation that had consumed years of her life, about the evidence in the footlocker, and about Leland Croy, who was not a distant cousin at all, but an agent of the very company that had caused all this suffering. The journal made that clear. My grandmother had discovered his connection to ridgeline mining in the final months of her life. He had been sent to watch her, to find out what she knew, and when she became too weak to resist, to take control of her property and destroy whatever evidence she had gathered. Leonard Crawford, as it turned out, was his real name. He was not just a random con artist. He had worked for Ridgeline Mining's parent company for 15 years, before striking out on his own as a fixer, a problem solver, a man who made inconvenient situations disappear. When the company learned that Miriam Calloway was dying, they hired him to do what he did best: infiltrate, manipulate, and eliminate threats. My grandmother was supposed to be his easiest target yet. He had underestimated her, and he had underestimated me. By the end of that morning, something had shifted in the room. These were not just neighbors offering help. They were people who had been wronged by the same silence, the same cover-up, the same corporate indifference that had killed my parents. Mrs. Patterson, the librarian, spoke up first. Her husband had died of a rare blood cancer 5 years ago. The doctors never found a cause. Now she wondered if they had been looking in the wrong place. Old Mr. Jennings, who ran the feed store, said his cattle had been dying mysteriously for years. The vet blamed bad feed, but the timing matched exactly with when Ridgeline had buried their waste. Herschel Bryn stood up, his weathered hands gripping the back of a chair. "Miriam Calloway saved my farm 20 years ago," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Gave me a loan when the bank wouldn't, never asked for a cent of interest. I always wondered why she retreated from the world the way she did. Now I know." He looked at me with eyes that were wet with tears he would not shed. "Whatever you need, you've got it." One by one they stood. One by one, they added their voices to mine. This was not just my fight anymore. This was Willow Creek's fight. This was a community finally finding the courage to face a truth that had been poisoning them for decades. I was no longer alone. I had an army. The fight that followed was not quick or easy. Clarence Odom took my evidence to the state attorney general's office. The case was complicated, he warned. The original company no longer existed, and the current owners of the land had lawyers who would fight every step of the way. but the evidence was overwhelming. And once the first news stories began to appear, more witnesses came forward. Former Ridgeline employees who had kept silent for decades, afraid of retaliation. Families of other people who had been sickened by the contamination. People whose illnesses had never been explained. Environmental scientists who had suspected something was wrong, but had never been able to prove it. My grandmother's years of lonely work had laid the foundation. Now others were building on it. Leland Croy, Leonard Crawford, was arrested trying to flee the state. He had a history of elder fraud in 3 other states, a pattern of targeting vulnerable people and stealing their assets. The deed transfer my grandmother had supposedly signed was proven to be a forgery, executed when she was too ill to understand what she was signing. The farmhouse was mine. The land was mine. The truth was finally known, but the victory came at a cost. In the weeks of the investigation, someone broke into Opal's house while I was staying there. Nothing was taken, but a message was left, scrawled in red paint on the kitchen wall. Leave now. 2 nights later, my grandmother's workshop burned. The fire department called it arson. I was afraid. I will not pretend otherwise. There were nights when I sat in Opal's spare bedroom, looking at the $100,000 I had left in the cave, thinking about how easy it would be to disappear. One night I almost did it. I packed my bag. I counted my remaining money. I stood at the front door with my hand on the knob, ready to run. Then I found something I had missed in the footlocker. At the very bottom, beneath all the files and folders, was a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. Hundreds of letters, all addressed to me. Every month for over a decade, my grandmother had written to me. Every month she had tried to reach me through the foster care system, to let me know she was thinking of me, to tell me that I was loved. Every letter had been returned. Unable to deliver, recipient information protected. The system that was supposed to protect me had kept me from the one person who truly loved me. I picked up the first letter. The envelope was yellowed, the stamp faded. The return address was this farmhouse. The destination was a foster home in the city, a place I had lived for 11 months when I was 8 years old. I remembered that home. I remembered lying awake at night, wondering if anyone in the world was thinking about me. Someone was. Every single month, someone was writing to me, trying to reach me, refusing to give up. And the system had stopped every letter. I opened the envelope carefully, as if it might crumble to dust. "My darling Wren," it began. "Happy birthday, my sweet girl. You are 8 years old today. I wish I could be there to bake you a cake and watch you blow out the candles. Instead, I am sitting at my kitchen table, looking at the mountains, thinking of you. I want you to know that not a single day goes by when I don't think of you. Not a single night when I don't pray for you. You are always in my heart, even when I cannot be with you. I hope someday you will understand why I had to let you go. I hope someday I will be able to explain everything. Until then, please remember, you are loved. You are wanted. You belong to me, and I belong to you, no matter what anyone says. Forever yours, Grandma Miriam." I read every letter, all 237 of them. It took me the rest of the night and most of the next morning. When I finished, I was not the same person I had been before. The girl who had believed she was abandoned, who had built walls around her heart to survive, who had told herself that love was for other people. That girl was gone. In her place was someone new, someone who finally understood the truth. I had always been loved. I had always been wanted. I had always belonged. And now I was going to fight for the woman who had never stopped fighting for me. I unpacked my bag. I walked to the front door and locked it. I was not running, not anymore. The investigation took 6 more months. There were depositions and hearings and more late nights than I could count. The company that had purchased the Ridgeline land tried everything to discredit the evidence, to paint my grandmother as a mentally unstable woman whose work could not be trusted. But the soil samples were real. The water tests were real. The internal memos were real. And the community of Willow Creek stood behind me. Herschel Bryn testified about the strange illnesses that had plagued local livestock for years. The hardware store owner testified about the mysterious health problems that had affected 3 generations of his family. A former state geologist testified that he had been pressured to alter his reports. One by one, the walls of silence came down. The settlement was announced on a cold February morning, almost a year after I had first arrived in Willow Creek. The company admitted no wrongdoing. They never do. But they agreed to establish a massive cleanup fund for the contaminated land. They agreed to compensate the families who had been affected. They agreed to pay all back taxes and liens on my grandmother's property. And they agreed to pay me a settlement. The amount is confidential, but it was more than the $100,000 still sitting in the cave. It was enough to ensure I would never have to worry about money again. But the money was not why I fought. I fought because my grandmother had spent years fighting alone, and she deserved to have someone finish what she started. I fought because my parents deserved to have their deaths mean something. I fought because I finally understood that some things are worth more than safety, more than comfort, more than a clean slate. Some things are worth dying for, and some things are worth living for. I am standing on the porch of the farmhouse now. It is autumn again, a year after I first walked up Cedar Ridge Road with nothing but a plastic bag of belongings and a map pressed against my heart. The house has been repaired. The white clapboard gleams in the October sunshine. The green shutters have been repainted and window boxes overflow with late-season flowers. Smoke rises from the chimney, carrying the smell of the wood fire burning inside. The barn behind me has been restored too. Herschel Bryn and his sons helped with the heavy lifting, refusing any payment. Your grandmother would have done the same for us, he said, and I knew it was true. I am learning to work the land. It is hard work, harder than anything I have ever done. My hands are calloused now, my arms stronger than they have ever been. I wake before dawn and fall into bed exhausted, and I have never been happier. Opal Sutter comes by every Sunday for dinner. She has become the grandmother I never had the chance to know, the one who teaches me to cook and garden and navigate the small mysteries of small-town life. She is 73 years old now and stronger than most people half her age. I am studying for my GED, taking classes at the community center in town. Next year, I will apply to the state university to study environmental science. I want to learn how to heal the land, to undo the damage that greed and negligence have caused. I want to continue my grandmother's work. The $100,000 is still in the cave. I have never gone back to get it. Maybe someday I will, if I truly need it. But for now, I prefer to leave it there, a silent monument to a path I did not take. That money represents freedom, but I have found a different kind of freedom, one that my grandmother understood better than anyone. The freedom that comes from belonging. The freedom that comes from being known. The freedom that comes from having a home. Not just a place to sleep, but a place where people know your name and remember your grandmother and care what happens to you. For most of my life, I believed I was abandoned. I believed I was unwanted. I believed that love was something other people got to have, not me. My grandmother's final gift was to show me how wrong I was. She loved me enough to let me go. She loved me enough to spend years building a case that would expose the people who had destroyed our family. She loved me enough to leave me a choice, even though it was the hardest choice anyone could face. And she loved me enough to trust that I would choose to fight. That is the real inheritance she left me. Not the land, not the money, not even the evidence in the footlocker. She left me the truth about who I am. I am Wren Calloway. I am the granddaughter of Miriam Calloway, who was not a broken woman, but a warrior. I am the daughter of Thomas and Grace Calloway, who did not die in an accident, but were killed by the carelessness of people who valued profit over human life. I am someone who was loved, who is loved, who will always be loved, and I am finally home. Thank you for walking this journey with me. If this story touched something in you, if it made you think about the stories you have told yourself about your own life, I want to hear from you. Have you ever discovered that someone you thought abandoned you was actually protecting you? Have you ever found home in a place you never expected? Have you ever made a choice that changed everything? Your story matters. Share it in the comments below. And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories about hope and second chances and finding where you belong, please subscribe to this channel. We are building a community here, a community of people who understand that the hardest journeys often lead to the most beautiful destinations. Because that is what my grandmother taught me in her letters and her journal and her final gift. The darkest roads can lead to the brightest places. The deepest losses can become the greatest love. And home is not just a place you inherit, it is a place you choose. Thank you for listening. Until next time. The end.